Netflix's new take on Scott Pilgrim is a weird one. A sequel spin-off of the original taking off in a new direction. Haha! It's got new jokes, new set pieces, new romances. It's full of that funny Scott Pilgrim wit that so many people enjoy and I adore. But at the same time, I can't help but feel the story and conflict in the background feeling half-baked and almost redundant. I'm gonna spoil the show now. Go watch it. I liked the show. The setup is really interesting. It's a fresh take on the story that you've probably seen before. I hope so. The show will not make sense otherwise. What if Scott Pilgrim disappeared out of his own story? Ramona then has to reconcile with her immature exes, revealing her immaturity as it goes. I like this take on the series in theory, but the growing mystery in the background is ultimately where my big problems lie. To give a quick rundown of the plot, Scott meets a girl named Ramona. He's dating a high schooler as well, 𝘽𝙀𝙎𝙎. He decides to two-time these girls. His band is disgusted at this as well, and his gay roommate. Scott then has to fight Ramona's 7 evil exes, but he loses against the first one and seemingly dies. What the heck? But Ramona then hears him in her subspace highway magic bullshit, and the mystery begins. What happened to Scott? Initially, the mystery of what happened to Scott at the end of episode 1 is very intriguing. Its shock value is instantly exciting. But as the story progresses, it narrows its focus into something not so interesting. I almost instantly guessed the trope that was used. Like you can watch it on Milk. Is it gonna be like future Scott? Scott from the future is gonna save his... It's like a time travel story or something. Scott from the future came to the present to stop himself from dating Ramona because they were divorced and he's a loser. The trope of your future self trying to rewrite mistakes, while isn't inherently bad, it's just that the execution is very shallow, which is very disappointing because I think the original series is nothing close to that. This is due to a couple of factors. Lack of time spent fleshing out old Scott's failing relationship with old Ramona, lack of time spent with regular Scott and Ramona in the show to establish a connection between them. I think with a few more episodes at the end establishing future Scott and future Ramona as more interesting characters would tie up the narrative in a much tighter way, instead of this weird teleportation bomb in the theater in the final episode with the most over-dramatic climax of all time. This ultimate climax of future Ramona telling future Scott that he gave up on their relationship in such vague terms when we were under the impression they were divorced, thus creating this conflict in the first place. It's this childish retreading of lessons, which is kind of frustrating. I understand everybody makes mistakes and can always learn lessons multiple times. Oh god, I fucking know. It's just the lack of any setup with any of the Scott and Ramona relationship stuff is what makes it feel shallow. It makes the complex relationships with every other character seem so black and white, love being binary. You've got sparks or not. I'm not saying that sparks aren't real, you can't feel that instant attraction to someone like Wallace does. I would just like to see actual time spent with the lovebirds getting to know each other and developing an actual relationship, or the actual problems Ramona and Scott had in their marriage. It's a shortcut to actual development. And I guess it does the job for most people, but it wasn't believable for me. Ramona goes on a journey and talks to each of her exes, desperately trying to find out who kidnapped Scott in his fight with Matthew Patel. In the moment, it was a really interesting take on the series, but in practice isn't really consistent for Ramona as a character. Like, she ran away from almost every relationship and is now trying so hard to be with Scott after one date. I would get it if Bryan wanted to change up her characterization for this version, but the main crux of all of her relationships failing is her running away, still in this alternate universe. That isn't something that she confronts until all of the conflict with Scott throughout the entire original story. Obviously, she feels guilty about Scott disappearing, but after the final twist near the end of the story, it sort of took me out of the entire plot. It had no real impact. There is no actual character arc if she is actively ready to confront all of the exes. In the original story, she is reluctant to even talk about them, not wanting to talk about her past like in the first episode of Takes Off. But whenever Scott disappears, her character completely changes. And like, I think the show is aware how unrealistic this character trait is. Ramona literally jokes about it in episode 5.
And I needed an excuse to be on set so I could get close enough to Todd to find out if he used a vegan portal to kidnap this guy I went out with one time.
Like, the show is aware of how kind of stupid it is, this fun what if scenario. I just expect more of the story than what it gives in this adaptation. I understand what they were going for. Ramona not being in control of her relationship, causing her to go looking, but she's not always had control of her relationships. Todd and her had a mutual breakup. Gideon literally mind controlled her. I guess in this universe, maybe different things occurred, but it's hard to fill in these character gaps when so much of the basis of our collective understanding is based on the already existing material, without any further characterization provided, besides her watching Columbo as a kid, which is pretty funny. Scott also coming back at the end of episode 6 defeats the entire purpose of Ramona looking. Obviously, it's to reconcile with some exes, but past Lucas Lee and Roxy, the others were just kind of goofy episodes meant to be entertaining. And the plot is not even the main focus of the majority of the show, which I think is to its benefit until the last 3 episodes. It's about the evil exes and all the other side characters. Almost all the exes get fleshed out, some in more ways than the comic ever did, combining Lucas Lee's characterization in the comic and movie to create this lovable tough guy, getting this sweet moment with Ramona, reconciling their differences. Same thing with Roxy, who was also done dirty by that gay flag-haired bitch, bringing more light to how they broke up, as well as Gideon, Todd, even Matthew Patel, all have fun episodes surrounding them. Wallace and Knives get some attention, maturing past their movie counterparts. This is the most appealing part of the show, and why so many people are so positive about it. An even less serious take on Scott Pilgrim, like a complete comedy. But at the end of the show, Bryan wanted to bring the barely progressing plot to the forefront. This whack mystery of Ramona just bothering people and being a stunt double or trashing a video store. I don't think going back to Scott here was the way to structure the show, knowing it only had 8 episodes. The reveal happens at the end of episode 6. They then have 2 episodes to explain an entire time travel plot, musical plot, Gideon revenge plot, Wallace character arc, Knives character arc, Stephen Stills, Ramona and Scott's character arc, future Scott's character arc, Ramona, future. So many things needed to be wrapped up without the setup for half of them being established until this point. And then most of these things are not even expanded upon, traded for more funny moments, like Wallace's future husband working at Nintendo, or that hilarious Japanese music video, which I ain't complaining. I was dying. I was laughing my ass off. Now I know my own ego. So trying to connect it back to Scott and Ramona's relationship again at the end feels cheap. Like, of course the audience will like that. That's the couple from the movie. But what if they interacted even less? The show isn't about them. Obviously, Scott is mentioned every episode, and Ramona slowly learns more about him as it goes, but it's not enough to make it believable. I just wish the show had more episodes to flesh out the future Scott plotline, because I think that would save the show. It really fumbles the bag at the end, and it just makes me mixed on the entire series, even though episodes 1 through 5, I was loving it. I was laughing my ass off. I was enjoying it, but it ultimately feels lacking. And I love Bryan's work. The writing in this is impeccable. It has some of the funniest lines in Scott Pilgrim.
That famous detective.
Columbo?
I was gonna say Detective Pikachu.
Reiterating jokes in a hilarious way, like the Scott Pilgrim musical, the Sonic pickup line, Wallace and Todd's relationship, Envy's performance at the funeral. And don't even get me started on the soundtrack and all the new Sex Bomb songs. I was banging. I didn't even mention the amazing animation and art style. Like, they somehow combined the comic art style with anime to make it look amazing. And there's just random spurts of amazing animation. Like, you're watching a normal scene that looks pretty good. It looks pretty fluid. The characters are moving more than you would see in a typical anime. Then all of a sudden they pull out the craziest Sakuga you've ever seen. It makes the mundane moments more entertaining, and I feel like that at its core is what Scott Pilgrim is about, is this taking this mundane, grounded story and inserting absurdity into it, and I feel like the animation definitely reflects that. But in the end, I can't help but feel mixed for the way they ended the series. It feels like a fun retelling in one way and a failed rehashing in another, sort of reiterating the same themes as the original without the setup necessary to leave a similar impact. I liked it, and I've been listening to the soundtrack non-stop. I just can't help but feel off towards it as a huge Scott Pilgrim fan. I tried going in with zero expectations, but ultimately it's hard to not compare this version to the original and the film. Envy's still a baddie though, like let's be honest here. She's like, goddamn.